5 years ago, the United Nations adopted 17 broad goals designed to achieve a better and sustainable future for all humanity. In order to achieve them by 2030, as per the original target, requires funding. And funding, as we all know in COVID times, is scarce. So how do we mind the gap? Or importantly, how do we fund the gap? That's the focus of my conversation today with Sunil Kaushal. He is the CEO of Africa and the Middle East at Standard Chartered. Sunil, thank you for your time. I think let's perhaps begin by quantifying the amount of money that is required.
In terms of just the requirements for Africa, our estimate is to meet the infrastructure requirements, which covers most of the SDG goals. You're looking at a minimum of $500 billion a year. And that's a huge sum. That's a real huge sum. And as you mentioned, we've got only 10 years, not even 10 years now left to achieve this target. So it is quite an aggressive time frame. And we have already, I think, lost 10 months of this year. And many projects have got delayed, which would have bridged the gap somewhat. So it is quite a difficult situation to be in if we have to meet the targets as set out by 2030.
And as we know, Sunil, Africa, of course, doesn't have the money. It's got a lot of requirements that have been exacerbated by the coronavirus. So the question then becomes, where do we find the money?
See, Africa has the resources. Africa has got the natural resources. It has got the human resources. It has to really, set a framework for an aggressive inflow of capital. You're absolutely right. The savings rates are not very high for it to self-fund this massive investment program that is required. But it has the resources, and I think there are ways in which there is no silver bullet solution, but there are ways in which you could build brick by brick into having a framework and a strategy to largely fund this requirement. And it'll require support and it'll require diversification and a diverse set of funding sources. So there's no doubt about it. But we remain quite optimistic that given the prospects of Africa, it is not about just getting the capital in, but also giving a commercially attractive return on that capital. We are quite confident about that.
Yeah. So you speak of new frameworks that are required for us to be able to find this capital. And another word that I'm hearing increasingly these days is new partnerships and new ways of doing things for us to be able to be successful. I want to talk about those frameworks and what they might look like.
See, when you started off, Godfrey, you mentioned about the large twin deficits, the strain on the government finances. And there is no doubt that in the last 10 years, Africa has made remarkable progress, supported by the inflow of foreign capital into many of the economies. Unfortunately, that has somewhat slowed because of COVID. And the situation has got exacerbated with COVID and funding going towards healthcare and supporting the economy. I think we will first of all require an immediate solution to address the sovereign requirements to be able to fund its immediate requirements, and because the fiscal deficits have gone up. What do I mean by that? Multilateral support, private sector support, innovative solutions around one of the things, one of the options that was discussed, and I think is worthwhile exploring is how do you give special drawing rights, transfer special drawing rights to the countries that are in need, so that at least that part is taken care of. And then you have the DFIs, the multilateral institutions coming and supporting the borrowing from the public markets. So you need a combination of that. And we also believe that blended finance, which is a combination of private sector, NGO funding and multilateral funding, that again can play a big role. So we require a lot of capital. We will have to think about diverse sources, but there are opportunities to really address the need.
Yeah. So clearly a lot of work is required out of the governments in order for them to be able to enable these funds to come into our spaces. So let's talk about what's required from the government side for us to be able to unlock the blended finance that you speak of, and of course to enable the DFIs to be able to go and borrow in international markets.
I think from capital comes to opportunities where there is stability of policy, uh, where there is confidence that the economy or the country has strong governance, it has uh, clear policies, and in case of any dispute, a transparent and speedy dispute resolution mechanism. So it has to. So let me step back and answer this question a different way. If we are talking about sustainable development goals to be achieved, in the budgeting process, the governments have to be very clear which projects money is required for, how are they going to make those projects sustainable, and then where are the pools of capital available. There is a huge pool of capital waiting to come into sustainable finance or sustainable projects, and the need for infrastructure is massive. But it has to start at a level where you're framing the requirement and then ensuring that the projects that you're going into are really meeting the sustainable development goal principles and requirements, and then the capital will flow in. And then the framework that I mentioned about governance, uh, you know lack of corruption, transparency in procurement, all those are very, very important. The good news is the progressive government's already thinking on those lines. They see the need for capital. They are looking at what frameworks to adopt so that they can attract the capital. And we are seeing early signs of progress. However, as I said at the beginning, COVID has taken its toll in terms of deferring. So when we were at the World Economic Forum earlier this year, sustainable finance was a big topic, and my conversations with a lot of the finance ministers and government officials from Africa were that they were very keen to explore and create the framework there. So the intent is there. The frameworks, I'm sure, would be created over a period of time, and the capital would come. But you have to really, at the project stage, start planning, and that's when the capital will be attracted.
Yeah, I want to talk about that sustainable finance, but before we do so, I wanted to talk about, of course, the work that remains to be done from the government front, and of course, the role that the mediators, the financial mediators, people like yourselves, play in that process.
So our role is that we bring in the best practice. We advise projects in terms of, if you really want to attract capital from a certain pool, these are the requirements. And you raise a very good point. If you start involving, experts in the field, and there are quite a few experts there. If you start involving the experts in the field, they can advise you on not only making the project bankable, but they can also advise you on how do you bring in the right sort of capital, diversify a capital base, and bring in more innovative structures to bring capital in. So there is a role to play. That also gives confidence to the overseas capital providers that there is a credible party advising on these projects and on these initiatives. So I think it's an important one, and there is a role that the experts can play.
Yeah.
But that's important to bring in, because there is always a fear that there is a lot of talk, but when it comes to actual implementation, standards may not be followed.
Yeah, you of course as Standard Chartered have made some ground on this front. You have already done some work, and I want to refer to your survey here where you identified what you are calling a $394 billion investment opportunity, which lies in funding's achievement of the social development goals. Let's talk about what you found. Let's also talk about who you talked to.
So this is a very targeted, a very detailed, review that was done. We released the report, which is Opportunity 2030, which we released just during the World Economic Forum in Davos. I was part of the team when we were engaging and talking to various participants, including participants from Africa. We made it very specific. We picked up only 3 out of the 17 sustainable goals, and we identified the opportunity around each of the initiatives across some of the, I think it was 17 emerging markets where the opportunity was. And then we identified the dollar amount of the opportunity so that the private sector can, look at it and say, you know what, this sector is where I operate. These are the countries where the biggest opportunity is, and this is what the price is. So we did a very detailed analysis, involved a lot of experts, got our analysis also certified by experts, and then came up with the report. And you can just imagine, these are only 3 of the 17, and the prize is so huge. So if you all include all the 17, it's a massive, massive opportunity. And then it has a flywheel effect in terms of creating jobs, in terms of adding, of course, to the GDP, and then creating the foundation for more sustainable growth.
And one of the things I found interesting was that, in a sense, you were already preaching to the converted, because you say here that you found 93% saying they were likely to increase investment in the future, and 54% of Africa investors said their investments had performed well as well. What do they like in particular, before we talk about perhaps areas where they want improvement?
Where they want improvement?
Yes.
Yes, I
And
think
what they like.
in term, typical of emerging markets, they clearly want the pace of execution to improve. They want stability of policies, and no U-turn of policies when, for instance, the administration changes or the political party changes that's ruling the country. They really want access to foreign exchange to take their share of profits, which has been agreed overseas to their parents. So I think, and of course, as I said, if there is any dispute, they want a fair mechanism for resolution. So I think overall, the experience has been where it has been invested, the returns have been good. However, one cannot say that all the other aspects that I spoke about in terms of timely execution, etc., have been perfect. But I think as the market matures, we should see good progress on that front as well.
So let's talk about sustainable financing and what it represents as an opportunity for the African continent. Let's go to school, Sunil. Define it for me.
A sustainable finance you're talking about?
Yes.
Define it for you?
Yes.
Yeah, so absolutely. So sustainable finance, first of all, has to really have an end use in a project that follows the sustainable goals in terms of impact on all your stakeholders, the impact whether it is on your community, environment, as well as employees. So it is a very broad-based definition as such, and that's when you say the project is sustainable. It is following, of course, when you start getting into industries, specific industries, then emission standards, etc., come in. But at the end of the day, I would say sustainable finance is one which is is something which delivers to the expectations of all stakeholders, and there the community and the planet are paramount as well.
Yeah. And you at Standard Chartered are saying that money is there.
Oh, there is a huge amount, and I think it is going to grow by leaps and bounds. It is looking at the platform, it is looking at opportunities to come in, and it wants an assurance that when you say it's a sustainable project or is following sustainable principles, it actually is following. So that's when the confidence comes in. Yeah. It's a market which is evolving and maturing. We had sustainable financing in terms of public markets. All of last year would have been $200 billion. This year it has moved by 3x, more than 3x already. So it is gaining momentum. and there is also people want to put their capital as a force for good, to make a difference, and they're looking at projects, they're looking at governments, they're looking at corporations which have a purpose where they could put their capital in and make a difference.
Yeah, let's talk about those projects, Sunil, because that's key, isn't it? To identify those projects and then, of course, make them bankable. What sort of projects would be appropriate for the type of financing that we are talking about?
Godfrey, the projects actually are very wide ranging. The projects could be from, what you and I are currently using, digital, to, again, where we are sitting and we see electricity lightening up this room, to power, to roads, to water. It is all encompassing, and including financial services, so that you're supporting SMEs, micro lending, microfinance, etc. So it is very, very broad. It touches every aspect of our life. So there is no constraining factor as such, but it has to be following the principles that I mentioned to you earlier on.
Yeah, and of course,
And
for
where
it,
we are seeing
yeah,
where we are seeing the maximum capital come in,
yeah,
and is around power across, whether you're talking about hydro, gas, then you're looking at roadways, waterways, and with COVID now, I think healthcare and health sector is going to be right on top in terms of attracting capital.
yeah. We know, of course, power is a big issue in Africa. I think the last stats that I saw show that two-thirds of Africans have no power, and therefore the requirement is huge. And we know for development to take place, economic development, you do require power. Now, with it comes, of course, a requirement on the part of the government for strong and fair regulation. Are we seeing enough progress being made on that front for us to be able to attract that power into a very, very needy sector?
I think it's work in progress, and the good news is that the multilateral institutions that are coming in are pushing for power sector regulation and reforms. So I would say it is still work in progress. Some markets are ahead, as it would be, but there is a fair bit of work to be done, and that's why you see that Africa still relies on very, very costly furnace oil, diesel powered power, which is highly polluting. It's not sustainable in any way. It damages the environment. So there is a case to be made. And we are seeing some progress, but a lot more can be done, whether it's on renewables, hydro, uh, gas-based power plants. So there is a huge amount to be done.
Yeah. Earlier on, you referred to the need for the companies that invest in this sector to be able, of course, to get a return for their investment. I wanted to talk a little bit about that return and what is fair in this context, or do normal commercial rules apply?
It's a very general one. It's very difficult to talk about what would be a fair return, because every country risk is different. Um, every project profile can be different and vary. But I would say in terms of the current environment where global interest rates are so low, those expectations of returns also have moderated. However, with the impact of COVID and issues around debt sustainability, there's a risk premium which is kind of offsetting some of it. Uh, on balance, I would say if we have good, solid, bankable projects, capital would be available at rates that we saw pre-COVID, quite easily and in sufficient amounts.
Yeah. Earlier, you referred to the role that development finance institutions like the African Development Bank can play in this space. Let's talk about what can be done and how perhaps commercial banks can also come into the space.
They have been playing a great role. DFIs have been playing a great role. I don't want to comment on any specific DFI, but they have been playing a very prominent role in the sectors which we spoke about. I think the challenge now is that the demand for capital, which anyway had outstripped the the supply which was there. I'm talking from a DFI perspective or regional DFIs, has got further compounded with the support extended for COVID. So we will have to get DFI and multilateral support and put in structures where you're not relying on pure funding solutions, but also risk mitigation, where these institutions can actually provide support by way of guarantees and not cash, and then private sector can come in and do a multiple of that, and raise more money. What do I mean by that? If you're willing to lend $1 billion, instead of that you guarantee a billion, you guarantee a 4 billion, which is 3x or 4x, and you raise funding against that, and private sector comes in and acquires and raises the money. So it could be partly guaranteed, partially guaranteed, or fully guaranteed, but we'll have to look at different structures because the amount of capital required is now even more.
Yeah. Over the years, we have seen a diminishing role for overseas development aid. Is there still a role for aid in the projects that we're talking about?
I think you're referring to concessional finance.
Concessional finance, yes.
Yeah, it is. I think you will see for certain critical sectors, given the situation we are in, concessional finance coming into healthcare and into certain infrastructure projects. But I think increasingly we're going to see more bank. If you're looking at large quantities, it would have to come from, as I said, diverse sources, and those diverse sources would be a whole spectrum of public markets, export credit agencies, blended finance, and multilateral financing, so on and so forth. So I don't think you can rely on one particular source to fund such a huge requirement.
Yeah. So
but there is a limited.
Yeah.
There is a role.
Yeah.
But we have to keep it in context and in a relative sense that it will not be able to meet all the requirements.
Yeah. So you're reminding me of a term that I had said I would come back to earlier, the role of blended finance. I think, again, perhaps a definition at the beginning before we talk about what role it can play.
The definition is when you have, as the name suggests, you've got a participation from different capital providers. It could be the private sector, it could be DFI. It's a combination of private sector, DFI, NGOs, funds coming from foundations which have a philanthropic objective. So you bring that together to get the optimum structure and the optimum financing for the borrower. So you've got, let's put it in this way, you've got lenders with different objectives coming together and really creating the best solution for the borrower.
Absolutely. So as we sort of come into the end of our interview, Sunil, I wanted to talk a little bit about the actions, or shall we call it the low-hanging fruit that African governments need to take to try to get back on the growth path and accelerate development. In your view, what steps should they be taking?
I think in terms of the steps that need to be taken, first of all, how do you really ensure that demand doesn't completely collapse? Domestic demand is very, very important. And then support for the SME sector, because the unorganized sector is the one which provides bulk of the employment. So if you don't have employment, if you don't have demand, then the industry is going to suffer. So that's the first one. However, it's not an easy one. And that's again where we'll require multilateral support, given that the fiscal elbow room for many of the countries is quite limited. But that's the first starting point. The second one is to really double up on investments to value add to the commodity exports that are taking place, to the agricultural sector, because it is quite surprising and in many ways unacceptable that such a richly resourced continent like Africa, many countries still import basic food or are exporting just raw materials and not adding any value to their exports. The need of the hour is how do you create a sustainable flow of dollars from various sources, your exports, foreign direct investment, make the market attractive for portfolio investors to come in and invest and have peace of mind that when they want to take the money out, the foreign exchange will be available. So these are things that need to build on. So first step would be, how do you restore the confidence, ensure that the investor has again the confidence to bring in, put in their money for the returns they expect, and then take it out as and when they can. That should be the first step to really get the process going.
Yeah. So, I mean, when you look at the figures, clearly Africa is short. You mentioned portfolio investment on the African continent. And I think if one were to do the sums about the ratio of listed companies versus GDP, we probably would have the lowest on the African continent. So my next question to you is this. Have you seen evidence from the African governments in terms of trying to make sure that, one, they make it easy for the SMME sector to actually grow, and secondly, are improving the ease of doing business to enable the kind of capital market reforms and growth that we require?
See, the ease of doing business index is something which most African countries track and are very sensitive to. So they are continuously looking at improving their standings. I can name one country which, in the last 2 years fell quite a few notches, and we could see the tension in terms of looking at, or the right intent to look at where they had fallen short and how they could improve on it. So the intent is there, the monitoring is taking place. From the point of view of what I was referring to, we have seen capital flow out of emerging markets in general. The more riskier markets in Africa saw capital go out because of uncertainty. I think with the vaccine now around the corner, with global interest rates being so low, and Africa offering even now very good returns, if you start rebuilding the confidence by reaching out to investors, telling them your story, your strategy for the next 3 years, portfolio inflows will start coming in. We're already seeing it in certain markets. Egypt, for instance, has been at the forefront of it. Capital is coming back. So I think this is a great time to go out and tell your story to the investors.
Yeah, and I suppose you can also add the message, Sunil, that if you move forward with reform and you move quick and you are transparent, you are likely to be able to attract the capital that we've been talking about on this program today, which will enable future growth.
Absolutely, and that's what the investors are looking for. Your reassurance that reforms will be executed, projects would be executed on a timely manner, plus their capital is protected, and they can repatriate the profits as and when the projects start generating returns.
Absolutely, and that's our conversation for today with Sunil Kaushal. He is the CEO, Africa and the Middle East at Standard Chartered. Until next time, from all of us, goodbye.